Nestled in the heart of the rugged countryside, my 150-year-old ranch stood as a testament to resilience and legacy. Its weathered wooden beams whispered tales of generations past, each creak echoing stories of hard work and dedication. This land had been my family's sanctuary, a place where memories were forged around crackling fires and sun-drenched fields. But all that changed when the Homeowners Association, HOA, came knocking, their presence like an ominous cloud over my cherished home. The conflict began innocently enough, requests for minor modifications to the property, which I politely declined. However, it escalated quickly when they demanded more than just changes. They wanted control over my land, citing outdated regulations that seemed to ignore the very essence of what made this ranch special. Their persistence was relentless, and soon, tensions flared. One day, during a heated meeting, a member of the HOA brandished a gun, demanding that I relinquish my rights to the ranch. It was a shocking moment, one that transformed my peaceful existence into a battleground. This story is not merely about a dispute over property, it's a narrative of survival, determination, and the fight against injustice. As I recount the events that unfolded, readers will witness how a simple disagreement spiraled into a life-altering confrontation, ultimately leading me to take drastic measures to protect my heritage. The stakes were high, and the outcome would determine not only my future but also the fate of my family's legacy. My ranch wasn't just a piece of land, it was a living chronicle of history, woven with the blood, sweat, and dreams of generations before me. Built in the mid-1800s by my great-great-grandfather, the homestead had weathered countless storms, both literal and metaphorical. Back then, the frontier was wild and untamed, a place where survival meant battling nature itself. My ancestor, a man hardened by necessity and driven by ambition, carved out a life from the rugged terrain, building sturdy log cabins and taming the unpredictable soil to cultivate crops. Over time, the ranch expanded, growing alongside the family that called it home. Each generation added their own mark, new barns, fences, irrigation systems, each structure a testament to perseverance. By the time I inherited the land, the original homestead had evolved into a sprawling estate, complete with wide-open pastures, dense woodlands, and a creek-fed pond that shimmered under the summer sun. The main house, though aged, still bore the craftsmanship of those early pioneers. Every nail hammered into its frame, every plank laid across its floors, carried the weight of history. I spent my childhood there, riding horses through the same trails my ancestors once traversed, sleeping beneath quilts stitched together by hands long gone. The ranch wasn't just a place to live, it was a tangible connection to my roots, a reminder of where I came from and who I was meant to be. Yet, despite its age, the ranch remained vibrant and productive. I had modernized aspects of it without compromising its integrity. Solar panels lined the rooftops, providing sustainable energy while preserving the rustic charm. Organic gardens flourished beside the old stone well, supplying fresh produce year-round. Even the livestock, descendants of the original cattle my family raised, roamed freely across the fields. To me, this was more than a home, it was a legacy, a symbol of endurance in an ever-changing world. And now, that legacy was under threat. At first, the HOA's requests seemed harmless, minor adjustments to the exterior of my home, subtle landscaping tweaks, and occasional maintenance updates. They claimed these changes were necessary to maintain the community's aesthetic standards, ensuring that every property upheld a certain level of uniformity. I obliged at first, making small alterations here and there, thinking it was the price of living within a regulated neighborhood. But as the months passed, their demands grew increasingly unreasonable. They insisted on replacing my hand-carved wooden fence with a standardized vinyl alternative, arguing that the original design clashed with the modern look they envisioned. Then came the ultimatum to remove the century-old windmill that stood proudly near the pasture, claiming it was an eyesore and a potential safety hazard. Frustration simmered beneath my skin, but I held my tongue, hoping reason would prevail. That hope crumbled when they turned their attention to the main house itself. They cited outdated zoning laws, insisting that certain architectural features violated new ordinances. According to them, the exposed wooden beams and historic roofing tiles were non-compliant, and if I refused to change them, I could face fines or even legal action. When I pushed back, Pointing out that the ranch predated the formation of the HOA by nearly a century, their response was cold and unwavering. They didn't care about history, they cared about compliance. It became clear that their intentions extended beyond mere aesthetics. They weren't interested in preserving the character of my home, they wanted control. Meetings turned tense, their voices rising with frustration whenever I refused to comply. They accused me of being stubborn, unwilling to adapt to modern expectations. Meanwhile, I saw their actions for what they truly were, a slow but deliberate attempt to strip me of autonomy over my own land. The more I resisted, the more aggressive they became, wielding rules and regulations like weapons, determined to bend me to their will. The atmosphere at the next HOA meeting was electric with tension, a palpable sense of dread hanging in the air. As I walked into the community hall, I could feel the weight of judgment from the gathered members, their eyes narrowing as they exchanged knowing glances. The room buzzed with whispers, and I sensed that something was amiss. The usual formalities felt hollow, overshadowed by an impending storm. As the meeting commenced, the chairperson, a stern woman named Marla, took her place at the front, flanked by other board members. She launched into a rehearsed speech about compliance and the importance of maintaining community standards. Her words dripped with condescension, aimed directly at me. "We need to ensure that everyone adheres to the guidelines," she declared, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. "Some of us have forgotten our responsibilities." I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, feeling the heat of embarrassment creeping up my neck. I knew what was coming next. Sure enough, she gestured toward me, her expression hardening. "Mr. Thompson, we've given you ample opportunity to make the necessary changes. Your refusal to comply is not only disrespectful but also detrimental to the community." Gasps rippled through the audience, and I felt the pressure mount as all eyes turned to me. "I understand your concerns," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But this ranch has historical significance. I can't simply erase its identity to fit your vision." My words hung in the air, met with a chorus of disapproval. Some members nodded in agreement, while others rolled their eyes or scoffed audibly. Marla's lips curled into a smirk. "You're clinging to the past, Mr. Thompson. We live in a modern world now. If you can't adapt, perhaps it's time to reconsider your place here." The implications of her words hit me like a freight train. Was she suggesting I should leave? Just then, a commotion erupted at the back of the room. A tall man, whom I recognized as a fellow ranch owner, pushed his way forward, visibly agitated. "You can't do this. He's part of this community," he shouted, his voice booming with indignation. "You're trying to silence him because he won't bow down to your ridiculous demands." The tension in the room escalated rapidly. Members began shouting over one another, some siding with the HOA while others rallied behind me. In the chaos, I caught sight of Marla's face contorting with anger. She slammed her hand on the table, attempting to regain control. "Enough! This meeting is about order, not anarchy." But the situation spiraled further when, in a moment of sheer desperation, Marla pulled a small firearm from her bag, placing it on the table with a thud. Gasps filled the air, and the room fell silent. "If we can't resolve this peacefully, maybe we'll have to resort to more drastic measures," she warned, her voice low and menacing. Shock coursed through me. This was surreal, an HOA meeting turning into a standoff with a weapon involved. I couldn't believe my eyes. "What are you doing?" I exclaimed, standing up abruptly. "This is insane. You can't threaten violence." "Then stop resisting," she shot back, her eyes blazing with fury. "Give up the ranch, or face the consequences." The absurdity of the moment was overwhelming. I felt trapped, cornered by a group that had lost sight of reason. My heart raced as I realized that my home, my legacy, was now in immediate danger, not just from bureaucratic red tape but from a volatile confrontation that could escalate at any second. "Let's all calm down," I urged, trying to defuse the situation. "This isn't the solution. We can find a compromise." But my pleas fell on deaf ears as panic gripped the room. The atmosphere was thick with fear, uncertainty, and a brewing storm of emotions that threatened to explode. I knew then that I had to act swiftly, not just for myself but for the sake of everyone present. The stakes had risen dramatically, and I was determined to protect my heritage at all costs. The memory of that meeting haunted me. The way Marla had placed the gun on the table, the venom in her voice, the sheer absurdity of it all, it was unfathomable that a dispute over property regulations had escalated to such dangerous levels. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every gesture. Something had to be done, but what? Fighting them legally would be a losing battle. The HOA had deep pockets, endless paperwork, and an unrelenting drive to see me gone. Fleeing wasn't an option either. I wouldn't abandon my home, not after everything it represented. No, if I wanted to keep my ranch, I needed a different approach, one that would turn the tables entirely. That's when the idea struck me like lightning. What if I bought the HOA? At first, it sounded ridiculous. How does one simply purchase an organization responsible for governing an entire community? But the more I thought about it, the more plausible it became. HOAs, despite their authority, were not infallible entities. Many operated on tight budgets, struggling to cover maintenance costs, insurance, and administrative fees. If I could get my hands on the right financial records, I might uncover vulnerabilities, debts, liabilities, weaknesses that could be exploited. I started digging. I reached out to contacts in real estate and finance, discreetly inquiring about the inner workings of HOAs. What I found was surprising. Many smaller associations were financially unstable, relying on monthly dues that barely covered expenses. Some had accumulated debt from failed projects or legal battles. The more I learned, the clearer the picture became. This HOA was no exception. A few well-placed inquiries led me to an anonymous source who confirmed what I suspected: the association was drowning in unpaid bills and overdue assessments. Their budget was a ticking time bomb, and if the right pressure was applied, it could collapse entirely. The plan solidified in my mind. If the HOA was in financial distress, then acquiring it wouldn't require a traditional buyout. Instead, I could orchestrate a takeover by purchasing delinquent memberships. Many homeowners, frustrated with the HOA's authoritarian rule, had stopped paying dues altogether. If I acquired enough of these outstanding shares, I could gain voting power, enough to dismantle the current leadership and install a board of my own choosing. It was a bold move, but it was possible. Still, doubts lingered. Would this actually work? Could I really wrest control away from Marla and her cronies? More importantly, was this ethical? I wrestled with the morality of it, knowing that I was essentially exploiting a flawed system to save my own interests. But in the end, the choice was clear: let the HOA destroy my home, or take matters into my own hands. There was no middle ground. With renewed determination, I set my plan into motion. The first step was securing funding. I reached out to trusted investors, people who understood risk, who saw opportunity where others saw dead ends. Some were skeptical, questioning whether this was nothing more than a vendetta dressed up as strategy. But when I laid out the facts, showing them the HOA's precarious financial state, they saw the potential. Within days, I had the backing I needed. Next came the execution. I hired a legal team specializing in real estate disputes and corporate acquisitions. They worked tirelessly, combing through public records, identifying delinquent accounts, and preparing contracts for purchase. Every transaction had to be handled carefully. Too much activity in a short period might raise suspicion. I played it smart, spreading out purchases over several weeks, buying shares in bulk from absentee owners who had long since abandoned their obligations. The final piece of the puzzle was the election. HOA board elections were typically quiet affairs, with little competition and minimal voter turnout. But this time, things would be different. With my newfound influence, I could run candidates sympathetic to my cause, people who understood the importance of respecting property rights and historical preservation. Marla and her allies wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. As the pieces fell into place, I felt a surge of confidence. This wasn't just about reclaiming my land anymore, it was about proving that the system could be challenged, that those in power weren't untouchable. The HOA had underestimated me, believing they could push me around with threats and bureaucracy. But now, I was the one holding the cards. And soon, they would learn exactly what that meant. The first domino fell on a crisp autumn morning when I finalized the purchase of the largest block of delinquent HOA shares. The transaction was seamless, executed through intermediaries to avoid drawing attention. By the time Marla and the rest of the board noticed anything unusual, it was already too late. My influence within the association had grown exponentially. I owned enough shares to sway key votes, and with strategic placements of my own candidates, the upcoming board elections were no longer a contest. They were a formality. The shift in power was swift and decisive. On election day, the ballots were counted under strict oversight, ensuring transparency. My slate of candidates swept the board, including a former attorney who specialized in property law and a retired local businessman known for his advocacy of individual freedoms. Marla, stunned and furious, watched helplessly as her tenure came to an abrupt end. She stormed out of the results announcement, muttering threats under her breath, but there was nothing she could do. Her reign was over. With the new board in place, I wasted no time implementing changes. The first order of business was dissolving the draconian policies that had been used as weapons against homeowners. Regulations dictating paint colors, landscaping choices, and architectural restrictions were either repealed or revised to allow for personal discretion. The oppressive fines that had burdened residents for years were nullified, and the backlog of unpaid dues was restructured into manageable payment plans. For the first time in years, the community breathed easier. But Marla wasn't going to disappear quietly. She and her remaining loyalists attempted to challenge the legitimacy of the election, filing complaints with county officials and threatening legal action. They argued that my acquisition of shares was somehow fraudulent, that I had manipulated the system for personal gain. Of course, none of their claims held water. Every transaction had been meticulously documented, every vote properly cast. Still, they persisted, dragging the matter through bureaucratic channels in a desperate bid to reclaim power. Their efforts were futile. The legal team I had assembled dismantled their arguments with ease, exposing their inconsistencies and outright falsehoods. Meanwhile, public sentiment turned decisively against them. Residents who had once feared speaking out now voiced their support for the new direction of the HOA. Petitions flooded in, demanding Marla and her allies be removed from any official involvement. The writing was on the wall. She was finished. Within weeks, Marla resigned in disgrace, retreating into obscurity. Her departure marked the final chapter of her tyranny, and with it, the transformation of the HOA was complete. What had once been an oppressive institution bent on controlling every aspect of homeowners' lives was now a body dedicated to protecting their rights. I had reclaimed not just my ranch, but the dignity of an entire community. With the dust settling on my unexpected victory, the transformation of the HOA began in earnest. The newly elected board convened regularly, prioritizing transparency and collaboration. Gone were the days of clandestine meetings and unilateral decisions. Instead, we implemented open forums where every homeowner could voice their concerns and suggestions. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. Neighbors who had once eyed each other warily now engaged in spirited discussions about community improvements, shared resources, and collective goals. The initial reactions from the community were mixed. Some residents, initially wary of my intentions, approached me with cautious optimism. They had witnessed the turmoil caused by Marla's regime and were eager to see if the promises of change would materialize. Others, particularly those who had supported the previous administration, expressed skepticism. They questioned whether I was merely trading one form of control for another. Yet, as the weeks passed and tangible improvements emerged, those doubts began to dissipate. One of the first initiatives we undertook was the restoration of the community garden. Once neglected and overrun with weeds, it blossomed into a vibrant space where neighbors gathered to plant vegetables and flowers. Children played nearby, and laughter echoed through the air as families bonded over shared harvests. The garden became a symbol of our newfound unity, a physical manifestation of our commitment to nurturing not just the land but also our relationships with one another. In addition to revitalizing communal spaces, we initiated a series of workshops focused on sustainable living practices. Local experts were invited to share knowledge on composting, rainwater harvesting, and organic gardening techniques. These sessions attracted diverse groups of residents, fostering connections among people who had previously kept to themselves. The sense of community that developed was palpable, a stark contrast to the isolation that had characterized the HOA under Marla's rule. However, not all was smooth sailing. As we moved forward, we encountered challenges that tested our resolve. Some homeowners, resistant to change, continued to express discontent. They missed the rigid structure that had defined the previous regime, believing that the new approach lacked discipline. To address these concerns, we organized town hall meetings, inviting feedback and encouraging dialogue. I emphasized that our goal was not to eliminate structure but to create a more inclusive environment where everyone's voice mattered. Despite the hurdles, the overall impact of my victory resonated throughout the community. Home values began to rise as the neighborhood transformed into a desirable place to live. The positive changes attracted new residents, bringing fresh energy and ideas to the area. People who had once considered leaving due to the HOA's oppressive nature now found reasons to stay, contributing to a thriving, dynamic community. As I walked through the streets, witnessing children playing in parks that had once been barren, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The ranch was safe, but more importantly, the spirit of the community had been rekindled. The journey had been fraught with challenges, yet it had forged stronger bonds among neighbors and instilled a renewed sense of pride in our shared home. The transformation was not just about reclaiming my property, it was about rebuilding a community rooted in respect, collaboration, and mutual support. Looking back on the tumultuous journey that led me to reclaim my ranch and reshape the HOA, I find myself reflecting on the deeper lessons learned along the way. At its core, this struggle was never just about property rights or bureaucratic control, it was about power, responsibility, and the delicate balance between individual freedom and collective governance. The HOA, once an entity designed to maintain order and harmony, had become a tool for oppression in the wrong hands. Marla and her allies wielded authority like a weapon, using obscure regulations and threats to subjugate those who dared to resist. Their actions served as a sobering reminder of how easily institutions meant to serve communities can be twisted into instruments of control when unchecked ambition takes hold. But power, in itself, is neither good nor evil, it is the intent behind its use that defines its impact. My decision to take over the HOA was not born out of vengeance, nor was it an attempt to impose my own rule upon others. Rather, it was an effort to restore balance, to ensure that no single person or faction could dictate the lives of an entire community. The transformation of the HOA demonstrated that leadership must be accountable, that governance should serve the people rather than dominate them. By dismantling the restrictive policies and fostering open communication, we created a space where homeowners could thrive without fear of arbitrary enforcement. Responsibility, too, played a crucial role in this experience. Taking control of the HOA was not a decision made lightly, it required careful planning, ethical considerations, and a commitment to acting in the best interest of the community. I had to ask myself whether I was prepared to shoulder the burden of leadership, to navigate the complexities of managing a diverse group of individuals with varying needs and perspectives. Ultimately, I realized that true leadership is not about asserting dominance but about listening, adapting, and ensuring that every voice has a place at the table. This journey also reinforced the importance of community resilience. In the face of adversity, people often retreat into silence, fearing retaliation or social ostracization. Yet, when given the opportunity to participate in shaping their own futures, individuals rise to the occasion. The revival of the community garden, the enthusiastic engagement in sustainability workshops, and the willingness of neighbors to collaborate on shared goals all pointed to a fundamental truth: when people feel heard and valued, they invest in their surroundings. The strength of a community lies not in its ability to enforce conformity but in its capacity to embrace diversity and foster cooperation. Perhaps the most profound lesson of all was the realization that change is possible, even in the most entrenched systems. Too often, people accept the status quo as immutable, believing that powerful institutions are impervious to reform. But my experience proved otherwise. By leveraging knowledge, strategy, and collective action, we dismantled an unjust system and replaced it with one built on fairness and inclusivity. It was a testament to the fact that when individuals unite with a common purpose, they can challenge even the most formidable obstacles. As I stand on the porch of my restored home, watching the sunrise cast golden light over the fields that have belonged to my family for generations, I feel a deep sense of fulfillment. The ranch is more than a piece of land, it is a symbol of perseverance, of the enduring human spirit that refuses to be silenced. The battle I fought was not just for my own legacy but for the principles that define who we are as a community. And in the end, that victory was far greater than any property dispute. It was a reaffirmation of the values that bind us together. The transformation of the HOA did not go unnoticed beyond our community. Word spread quickly about how a lone homeowner had successfully taken control of an oppressive board and reshaped it into a body that prioritized fairness and collaboration. News outlets picked up the story, highlighting the unconventional yet effective strategy one had employed. Legal analysts debated the implications of my approach, discussing how homeowners across the country might leverage similar tactics to challenge unjust HOA regulations. What had begun as a deeply personal battle had inadvertently sparked a broader conversation about the balance of power between homeowners and the organizations meant to govern them. Across the nation, communities facing similar struggles reached out, seeking advice on how to navigate their own conflicts with overbearing HOAs. Some homeowners found inspiration in my story, realizing that they, too, had options beyond passive resistance or costly litigation. Others, particularly those entrenched in adversarial relationships with their boards, saw a path forward, one that didn't necessarily require confrontation but rather strategic maneuvering within the existing framework. The idea that an HOA could be reformed from within, rather than simply battled against, gained traction among legal experts and community organizers alike. Local governments and housing authorities also took note, prompting discussions about regulatory reforms to prevent future abuses of power. While HOAs play an important role in maintaining neighborhood standards, my case underscored the dangers of unchecked authority. Legislators in several states began examining ways to introduce greater transparency and accountability into HOA operations, proposing measures such as mandatory financial disclosures, independent oversight committees, and stricter limitations on punitive fines. The precedent set by my actions had triggered a wave of scrutiny that could lead to meaningful change for homeowners nationwide. Beyond policy discussions, the cultural impact of the story was undeniable. Social media platforms buzzed with debates, memes, and commentary, transforming my personal ordeal into a symbol of defiance against bureaucratic overreach. Documentaries explored the rise of HOA conflicts across the United States, featuring interviews with legal experts, homeowners, and community leaders who had faced similar battles. My journey became a case study in grassroots activism, illustrating how individuals could harness legal tools and community support to reclaim their autonomy. Even Hollywood took notice. Several production companies reached out, expressing interest in adapting the story into a film or television series. The dramatic elements, the standoff, the covert acquisition of the HOA, the eventual triumph over corruption, made for compelling storytelling. While I remained hesitant about dramatization, the prospect of bringing awareness to the struggles faced by countless homeowners was undeniably appealing. If the story could inspire even one person to stand up against injustice, then the retelling would be worth it. Ultimately, the consequences of my actions extended far beyond my ranch. What had begun as a fight for personal property had evolved into a movement, challenging the very foundations of how communities are governed. The ripple effect of that decision was still unfolding, touching lives in ways I had never anticipated. This story is more than just a tale of conflict and resolution, it is a testament to the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. From the moment the HOA sought to strip me of my rights, I was presented with a choice: surrender or fight back. I chose the latter, not out of spite, but out of principle. My ranch was not just a possession, it was a legacy, a piece of history that deserved protection. And so, I refused to back down, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Resilience was my greatest ally throughout this battle. There were moments when defeat loomed large, when the HOA's threats felt overwhelming, when legal hurdles seemed impossible to overcome, and when doubt crept into my mind. But resilience is not about never faltering, it is about continuing forward despite the setbacks. Every obstacle I faced only strengthened my resolve, pushing me to think creatively, to strategize differently, and to remain steadfast in my mission. Defiance, too, played a crucial role. The HOA believed they could intimidate me into submission, that their authority was absolute. But authority without justice is meaningless. I refused to let fear dictate my decisions, and in doing so, I reminded them, and anyone else who may try to exert undue control, that power belongs to the people, not to those who seek to abuse it. Defiance is not rebellion for its own sake, it is the refusal to accept injustice when it is presented as inevitability. To those facing their own battles, whether against an overreaching authority, an unfair system, or personal hardship, remember this: you are not powerless. Knowledge, strategy, and unity can dismantle even the most entrenched opposition. Do not be afraid to question the status quo, to seek alternative solutions, and to stand up for what is right. The road may be difficult, but perseverance turns impossibilities into realities. This journey taught me that the fight for justice is never easy, but it is always worth it. My ranch remains standing, not just as a home, but as a symbol of resistance against oppression. And as long as there are those willing to defend their rights, no force, no matter how formidable, can ever truly take that away.